The Mindfulness Bible by Patrizia Collard. It's the complete guide to living in the moment. Part 1: The origin and uses of mindfulness, including recent research. First chapter: Mindfulness Origins and Pioneers. Mindfulness was first brought to Western awareness in 1960s when Westerners traveled to the East in order to learn about meditation and yoga. Thich Nhat Hanh, the first mindfulness teacher in Europe. The origins of mindfulness date back to 2500 BCE in the Sutras, as well as being connected to Taoist, Sufi, and yogic philosophies. The first text of importance to be translated in English in the 20th century was The Miracle of Mindfulness by the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh. It was originally written as a letter from exile in France to one of his brothers who had remained in Vietnam. He had founded the School of Youth for Social Services in Saigon. This grassroots relief organization rebuilt bombed villages, set up schools, established medical centers, and resettled families left homeless during the Vietnam War. The centers that Thich Nhat Hanh founded in 1960s were intended to help those who had lost everything, to teach children, and to set up medical stations for both sides engaged in the conflict. The letter's intention was to support his brothers back home to continue their work in the spirit of love and understanding. Nhat Hanh wished simply to remind them of essential discipline of mindfulness, even in the midst of very difficult circumstances. His letters were translated by an American volunteer, and it was Thich Nhat Hanh who suggested that they should translate it slowly and steadily, just 2 pages a day, and be aware of the feel of the pen and paper, of the position of his body and of his breath, in order to maintain the essence of mindfulness while doing this task. When the translation was complete, 100 copies were printed on a tiny offset machine squeezed into the delegation's bathroom. Since then, the little book has traveled far. Thich Nhat Hanh has written more than 100 books and traveled frequently to spread his message of peace. After being denied the permission to return to Vietnam, Thich Nhat Hanh spent most of his year living in Plum Village, a community that he helped to found in France. It is open to visitors from around the world who wish to spend a mindfulness retreat there. The proceeds from the fruits of hundreds of plum trees are used to assist hungry children in Vietnam. The second pioneer in mindfulness was in medicine, John Kabat-Zinn. John, who trained as a molecular biologist, became interested in Buddhism and studied Zen and Vipassana meditation for some time, and was inspired to bring meditation from its Buddhist origins into a more secular setting. In 1979, he gave up his promising scientific career and started a stress reduction clinic at Massachusetts University Hospital. The success of this program and the positive impact it had on the participants was huge. And since then, a lot of different mindfulness based therapeutic schools have evolved and have changed the lives of many participants for the better. Even patients suffering from recurrent depression and other such ailments have a chance to get better and stay better. John therefore began to use mindfulness techniques to treat patients with chronic pain and other ongoing conditions. Due to the successful outcome of the initial patient group treated with this approach, he started to develop his now world famous MBSR, Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction Program, an 8-week course designed to introduce participants to mindfulness and coping with stress and chronic pain more effectively. In 1991, John's book describing stress reduction clinics program in Massachusetts, Full Catastrophic Living, was published, and it sold more than 500,000 copies across the world. A book entitled Mindfulness Based Cognitive Therapy for Depression was the result of their studies and was published in 2002. This forms the foundation of teaching MBCT for depression. It includes deep research as well as humanity and kindness, and saw its second edition in 2013. The use of mindfulness for psychological and physical ailment continues to expand. The book also mentions some other important figures in modern mindfulness. In the 1940s, long before John Kabat-Zinn, psychologists and doctors like Wilhelm Reich used aspects of mindfulness psychology in their work. Reich had a profound influence on Fritz Perls, who developed Gestalt therapy, a kind of psychotherapy that focuses on individual freedom and responsibility. Book also covers the Buddha's influence on mindfulness. Siddhartha Gautam, who was later called the Buddha, the awakened one, was born a prince in what is now Nepal 2500 years ago. It was predicted by a wise man that he would become a great religious leader. His father, however, wanted him to become the next king and thus never allowed Siddhartha to leave the palace and see what life outside was. The prince never questioned his father's decision and got married and became the father of a son himself. But Siddhartha was always curious about life outside, and one day he visited a town and was deeply touched by the poverty, sickness, and death he witnessed. He had seen suffering to such an extent. This drove him to run away and embark on a spiritual journey that lasted about 14 years. He studied with famous spiritual teachers and learned to meditate and turn away from all the joys of life, although he realized after years of living as an ascetic that completely renouncing all pleasure was as unhelpful as living in splendor as he had during his early life. If you enjoy something in the moment but understand that it will not last forever, you will greatly reduce your suffering. One day he chose to sit under the tree of wisdom and decided not to get up until he had the answers to how one could reduce suffering. After more than a week of meditation, he became enlightened. He realized that extreme emotions, such as complete attachment or rejection, caused suffering. If you enjoy something in the moment, but understand that it will not last forever, you will greatly reduce your suffering. Similarly, if you can accept that there is suffering now, but it will pass, you will also suffer less. The Buddha refined his teachings and spread them, and Buddhists developed them into meditation practices and monastic living practices. One of the most important concepts of Buddhist philosophy is to accept that one's life frequently involves suffering, but then there are refined and tested ways of alleviating this. The Buddha, however, always encouraged his students to test his teachings to see whether they would actually help their own individual existence when put into practice. He warned his followers repeatedly of the dangers of dogma. For Buddha, his teachings were a way of life, a philosophy, and definitely not a religion. In the same way, mindfulness is a practical way of leading your life, which is meant to be of benefit to you and others. Taoism's influence on mindfulness. Another Eastern philosophy closely linked to and therefore informing mindfulness is Taoism. It offers an approach to life that is similar to mindfulness. The term Tao refers to all that is, all of creation. It is life, both inside and around us. Taoism is about listening to your intuition as your main source of wisdom rather than being led by convention and rules imposed from outside. Being in the moment, here and now, is equally important in Taoism. Living from moment to moment, you are liberated from the heavy load of worldly expectations. Unwanted and often unnecessary thoughts are and worries in your mind are released. And this makes room for helpful and compassionate actions. Another important aspect of Taoism is the letting go of all inner attachments. This does not mean that one should live one's life detached from other humans or without relationships. Rather, it means that true security and freedom can only be found in the inner authority, the Tao, and rather than in the institutions that are enforced on individual from outside. Such institutions and rules all too often come with restrictions and regulations which then stand in opposition to one's personal inner authority. This way of life is closely related to mindfulness, as it requires an inner freedom and the ability to observe without judgment. Observing should, even if possible, come without naming what is being observed, as speech and thoughts already lead to a particular direction, reducing freedom of perception. Just as in many mindfulness meditations, living the Tao offers us the possibility to practice observing processes within ourselves. By doing so, we can develop a true understanding of the state in which we find ourselves at any given moment. Feelings are accepted rather than restricted to held back. They are free to come and go. Why mindfulness is important now? A new threat facing us in the 21st century is something we thought would make our life easier. Everyday technology. A growing body of research on the subject of burnout shows that more and more people use their smartphones and tablets in bed, while having a shower, and in other previously private and technology free environments. We constantly receive emails and text messages, and often we feel that unless we respond more or less immediately, people will think something dreadful must have happened to us or that we might lose our job. Some individuals get so hooked that they can no longer find the off switch, and this can lead to burnout or stress related depression. Individuals who have got to this point may need as much as 8 weeks of in house treatment in a mental health institution to recover, and will be required to change their lifestyle to prevent something even worse from occurring. People seem to have lost the ability to simply be, enjoy the moment, and just have a cup of tea or eat lunch without continuing to work on their computer. For many people, their involvement in sitcoms and reality shows is more intense than their real life relationships. I'll repeat the line that is highlighted and is in bold. People seem to have lost the ability to simply be and enjoy the moment. People seem to be trying to multitask and work in autopilot mode, but nobody actually benefits from this. The result of this lifestyle is a lack of peace and enjoyment, and a number of destructive emotions that lead to psychosomatic diseases. However, mindfulness is increasingly seen as a way of alleviating problems caused by overusing handheld technology. When learning about mindfulness, it is important to realize that this skill may not necessarily heal you in a physical, tangible way. What it will do is change your perspective on your discomfort and open up new possibilities for moving on from simply existing and struggling to adventurous living. Should you be suffering from a long term condition such as a chronic pain, with mindfulness, you can learn to live with and around the pain rather than focusing on it all the time. By reconnecting to the simple moments in life, by truly living moment by moment rather than merely existing, your focus of awareness will change. The pain in your heel, for instance, will become a pain in the heel and may even retreat into the background of your awareness.